Then there's Jeff Jarrett, who disappeared off TV. We haven't seen him in a while. They were building to something with him and MJF, and then all of a sudden he just vanished. And you haven't heard me complain, but he was backstage at Dynamite after not being seen backstage for some time. And he was in the news this week after a story in the Orlando Sentinel titled, "Jeff Jarrett, Wrestling Fans' Bitter Tribalism Creates Cash." And this is from the article. So much of the world these days is built around arguments. I'm right, you're wrong, with no room in between for debate and discussion. If you have a take and you share it, you can be certain that it will be criticized. This sort of tribalism has infected the pro wrestling community, especially the battle between All Elite Wrestling and WWE. An increasing number of fans on social media not only promote their side's success, but hope for the other side's failure. It can be a toxic environment, but for a veteran wrestler like Jeff Jarrett of AEW, conflict smells like an opportunity. I love tribalism, Jarrett told the Sentinel last week. I embrace it because it's the nature of what pro wrestling is. Home team versus away, good versus evil, black, white, shades of gray. So many aspects of this world are super divisive and super tribalistic, but in wrestling with that ability to evoke emotion, you create more chatter, you create more passion, and you create more revenue. So Jeff Jarrett loves the tribalism among wrestling fans. At least he's honest about it. At least he's honest about it, and he's saying the quiet part out loud. Jarrett has been a promoter. Promoting has been in his family for 8 decades, all the way back to his grandmother. And don't let anybody ever tell you that Triple H and Tony Khan and any of these promoters don't fan the flames of tribalism between the two companies and feed into that toxicity that people love talking about. Oh, it's so toxic. There's so much toxicity out there. They feed into it as much as anyone. Triple H just has a more subtle way of taking digs and shots than Tony Khan does. Don't think for a second that they don't love this shit. People talk about how terrible the tribalism is between the two fan bases and how it's ruining wrestling. I've heard people say that sometimes. It ruins wrestling. It only ruins wrestling if you allow it to. But yes, it is terrible. I think it's pathetic. I don't really see how it's generating revenue either for either company outside of it may increase engagement on social media. I don't think tribalism itself generates much in the way of revenue. Right? No one is going to buy a ticket to an AEW show just to stick it to WWE or vice versa. But it's the idea of, hey, if they're engaging, then they're talking about you. It's like if you're a wrestler and you're out in front of the crowd, right? It doesn't matter if they're cheering you or they're booing you, so long as they're making noise. It's basically the same premise. That's why you have these engagement farming accounts online whose sole purpose is to inflame and to post really stupid shit to get people all riled up in the comments section. That's the sole reason they exist. And you'll see 20, 30, 50,000 shares and likes on some of these posts, but you look at what they're saying, and it makes your head hurt. But it's true. You can't engage with people online without people hijacking threads and conversations or tweets in support of one side or the other, and they just take it to the extreme. Yes, tribalism exists in the fan base in most other sports, because I've seen people saying that, like, you know, tribalism exists in baseball and football. And yes, I'm aware of that. This is not something unique to just pro wrestling. The difference is if the New York Mets have a terrible season and they win 50 games, I'm going to call them out for having a terrible season and only winning 50 games. I make jokes all the time about how terrible the Mets have been in the past. The WWE sickos and the AEW sickos, because guess what? They exist on both sides. They can't bring themselves to admit when anything is wrong because nothing is ever wrong. Or they'll what about you and they'll shift it over to the other company. There is a level of delusion when it comes to wrestling fans in particular that makes it next to impossible to carry on an intelligent dialogue with any of them. That is not something worth celebrating or encouraging, no matter who you are, promoter or not. Tribalism in and of itself doesn't have to be toxic, but more often than not with wrestling fans, that's exactly what ends up happening. That's exactly what it ends up being. Basic shit talking and tribalism these days are two totally different things. But the fans do a good job of playing foot soldier for these promoters, while they sit back and they watch the world burn. They definitely don't do anything to discourage it. Jarrett's just being honest about it, so if nothing else, I respect him for coming out and saying it.